So this month, really, after our break, we're going to be going over some orchid vocab. So our first word is a combo word, orchid enthusiast, which is all of you. And just for like a head count, how many of you orchid enthusiasts are new to the club within the past year?
How are you going to hear that?
People can unmute, or if anyone wants to put it in the chat, they're more than welcome.
Mm-hmm.
And they could do that through the whole thing if we want. It's just good to know how many new members are enjoying these talks.
Okay, so you can hear me even though you don't see my face.
Yeah.
Yes.
I have to finish doing dishes, but you're on.
Nice.
Okay. So, okay. Oh, okay. Yes. All right. Excellent.
Great. Well, welcome, Seth and Yvonne, who's been here for a couple of years. That's good. We'll send Patricia back into the group. Right. So our first word is orchid. This one is just kind of get us going. Definition is really just a plant we all love. Some of the actual Greek roots of this word are a little bit vulgar. I guess the Greeks were really into genitals, and they thought that some of the bulbs and stuff that orchids grow from resembled a male's genitals a lot. But we mostly enjoy the flowers, which is great because there are lots of examples of these wonderful plants, and they're one of the largest flowering plant families. And luckily, we are all able to enjoy them. So we're kind of getting into the different types of orchids. So we all know the ones we see in stores and everything, but in the wild, we can have epiphytic or epiphyte orchids. So they're going to be a plant which naturally grows upon another plant. So they're the ones you're going to see in trees. And originally the science was thought that these orchids were some sort of parasite and they were sucking the nutrients out of these trees, but they're not. They're not driving any nutrients from it. They're mostly just using it as a place to live, just like a home. They actually absorb some of the rainwater that comes down from the sky, and it's just a really great combo for everyone. And just an example of one of those, everyone can see me? Can everyone see me? Or just no?
They can. You might be very small. You might have to make it bigger on your Zoom window.
Oh, I could just hold my plant forward. Can you see my plant? It's also very small.
This is lots of roots. Yep, lots of good roots.
Yeah, I was really upset. So this is one of my home epiphyte orchids, and we actually made this in the club at one of our workshops for one of our meetings. And I recently took the wire off because I was hoping that he had grabbed onto this bark that I gave him to hold on to as his home, but he didn't, and he fell off. I had to wire him back up, and I threw out the wire because I was really confident that if I threw it out, he'd be super happy. So I had to replace it with this pipe cleaner. But this is a good example of kind of what you might see.
Yeah. There's also lithophytic and geophytic orchids. Lithophyte just means grows on rocks, and geo is just in earth, that you might also see when doing orchid stuff.
That is a really great transition too to our next type of orchid, which doesn't grow on rocks or on anything. It actually grows in the ground, and it's supported by the soil. So a really great example of this is a lot of our native orchids. Above we have some native orchids actually that are up in Lake Placid. These are our native lady slippers. And we have some jewel orchids. Those are also ones that are growing in the dirt, and the soil is really holding them up and giving them a home. But there are different types of orchids. So even if they grow from the dirt or on a tree or on a rock or wherever they're growing for their home, they're going to fall into one of these other two categories of monopodial, which is Latin for single foot. And I tried to show in this photo, you can mostly see the flower, but if you look down at the base, you'll see that there's really only one kind of spot that all this is coming from. So a monopodial orchid is an orchid that has a single stem growth habit. It produces leaves and flowers along that stem. Our vandas and phals are a really great example of these particular type. But there's another type, which is our sympodial orchid, which is Latin for many-footed. These guys are really cool. I definitely enjoyed learning about them for this presentation because their growth habit is it's not so much someone going straight up and down and reaching for the sky. It's kind of like rolling and they're grabbing the earth when they can. So these are going to be orchids with a spreading or lateral growth habit. And this type of orchid has a rhizome, which is a specialized stem which is often horizontal and will continue to send out roots as it grows. So our Cattleyas and Paphiopedilum are really great examples of this kind of orchid. And Elise had a really great example.
Yes, I have another example here that's, again, just crazy with the roots and kind of a mess. But this is a Vanda falcata or Neophonetia falcata. And we were talking about on the monopodial orchids, how a lot of Vandas are monopodial because they produce a single fan. But this Vanda happens to be a sympodial orchid. So it produces a fan and then it'll grow another fan and kind of keep spreading and growing that way. And that's a similar situation with the Paphiopedilums, where you might see one and think it might be a monopodial because you might only see one fan when it's brand new, but they'll grow and produce more and more fans. So it's actually a sympodial.
Elise, can you tell us what you mean when you say fan?
When I say fan, I mean just pretty much this whole cluster of leaves. So this group of leaves here, that would be one growth, essentially. Does that explain it for you?
Yeah, I think that's a great example.
Oh, yeah.
There's not like a good isolated one that I can, maybe this one can kind of see it better there.
Definitely. Your plants are probably they're probably so excited. They never thought they'd be celebrities.
I know, they're on YouTube now. They're famous.
Political disputes. On the other hand, party.
We're getting some background noise. Could people mute if they're not already muted?
Great. That's everyone. Thank you all so much. There we go. We'll put you back in the corner, but nobody put baby in the corner.
All right, so the next thing we're going to talk about is pseudobulbs. Pseudobulbs are this, it's a water storage and nutrient storage orchid at the base of the plant leaves. A lot of Cattleyas, a lot of our epiphytic plants have them as a way to store and maintain moisture while they're up in the tree. I've got another little example here. This is a newer plant that I thought kind of hard to see, but right at the base of these leaves here, we've got these little bulbs there, which are the pseudobulbs. And a lot of our orchids will have those.
That is a great example. It's really neat too that, like, I mean, in this picture, it seems like there's just not leaves, but in a lot of times when you see these, they're gonna look like these funny balloons with leaves on top.
Yeah. Well, I think this orchid is a Pleione, which actually is a deciduous orchid, so it loses all of its leaves and then it uses its energy stored in its pseudobulbs to bloom like this. So it's a really, really cool plant.
Oh, that is a great piece of information. Thank you.
So another specialized type of pseudobulb is something that's called a cane. We mostly see this when referring to dendrobiums, but this is essentially a larger, fatter stem you see especially on dendrobiums. I've got another wild plant here this is a Dendrobium ramosii. And I thought this was a good example of kind of what canes look like. When I was Googling this plant, they said that it had stem-like canes. So I guess it's got kind of thinner, more rambly canes or stems that are similar to canes. But again, these function as water storage organs and nutrient storage organs. So that's this plant. Again, talking about pseudobulbs, we've got something that will be called a back bulb, which is pretty much any pseudobulb behind the current growth. Those can be called back bulbs. A lot of the times when you're dividing plants, you can chop them off to make your plants a little smaller. And if you're looking to, start an orchid collection, you can grab those back bulbs. A lot of growers will just throw them out, but a lot of the times they can actually start growing more. If you see eyes, which I think we talk about in a few slides, exactly what that means, they can, grow and produce a new plant. And sometimes they even have like these latent buds that you won't actually be able to see, but they can still start growing from that. So that is what a back bulb is. All right, a sheath, another term that I've heard, especially with cattleyas. This is a modified leaf that kind of encloses the bud. So in this picture here, you can kind of see that hopefully there'll be a little bud that is inside of there. I don't know if it's going to actually flower. This is one of my plants that I took a picture of, but it might be an empty bud or there might be something in there, which is very exciting. Sometimes these sheaths go brown and then the flower blooms from that. Other times they stay green throughout the flowering. So it's really just kind of knowing what plant you have. But usually if you see a sheath going yellow on a plant that shouldn't happen, it might mean that the bud is going bad as well.
Cool. And speaking of buds, which kind of give us those wonderful, delightful things, which could be flowers, giving us more delightful things, which are plants, are kikis. It's a Hawaiian word. So kikis are offshoots. They're asexually produced from small plants that are produced along the base or at the stems of monopodial orchids. So they're growing straight up, and around the bottom there's going to be basically little baby plants. Which is super cool though, is that some of the Monopodial orchids are able to produce these kikis from up on the stem, kind of like this really great example photo. So the way that these are going to form is they're going to have leaves first and then roots. And you're able to divide them when the roots are 1 to 2 inches long. So dendrobiums and vandas are really great examples of plants that form a lot of kikis, and phalaenopsis are special examples, as you can see here, that produce kikis from buds along the flower stem, kind of like the Monopodial, actually kind of their own thing. It's a really cool phenomenon though that I've never had happen, but I hope would happen someday. At least, have you ever had this happen?
So I have some dendrobiums that happens with. Actually, this dendrobium that I have right here, you can see a smaller kiki kind of forming on the side here. There's a few others, but I've never had it happen with phalaenopsis. I know that there's like specialized, you can get something called kiki paste that's supposed to like help encourage this type of behavior. but I've never had it happen with Phalaenopsis or Vandas.
Maybe someday. It would be great. More plants.
Yeah, right.
And another kind of specialized thing that has to do with, I don't know, the plants are velamins. So velamin is a material. It's this white spongy material that kind of sheaths around the root. You've probably seen it on your plants. It's pretty noticeable. So this stuff is really great because it holds onto water until it's absorbed into the pseudobulbs or the leaves. So it's really just a storage device. And the plant's like, I'm thirsty. And the pseudobulb releases that water so the plant can have a drink. A lot of epiphytic orchids can do this. So they're up in the trees, they can't go grab water from the ground by growing. So they've got to have another way to kind of keep it around. And it's found along the roots. This one has a root tip that's growing, and that will be covered when it's kind of developed a little bit more.
So
we get into some more exciting stuff.
I thought this was interesting. So you guys probably will not come across diploid, triploid, or tetraploid in most of your orchid lifetime, but you might see something next to an orchid name that says 4N or maybe 3N, and that refers to ploidy, which is the sets of chromosomes. So a haploid means it has one set of chromosomes, and this would be found in pollen grains or other things like that. A normal plant, you and me, we all have two sets of chromosomes. And plants can do something weird where they can double their number of chromosomes. And you get something called a tetraploid, which is 4 sets. And then you can hybridize a tetraploid and a diploid, 4 and 2 sets, and get something that has 3 sets called a triploid. And then any multiple is referred to as a polyploid. But I find this interesting because if we go to the next slide, you can actually see tangible effects on the sets of chromosomes. So with a 4N type plant, you get a lot larger, heftier, more substantive flowers. So they're used a lot in hybridizing because they give you large, fuller, round, big flowers. There's a lot of material there in the flowers. So a lot of them will be like heftier versus something like the Vanda sanderiana on the right-hand side of the screen, which is just kind of a regular variety that definitely has some breeding to get kind of that bigger, rounder form. But it's a little lighter and it's a little smaller flower. So a lot of the times hybridizers will cross a 4N with a 2N to get a 3N, which makes a large, big flower, but it's kind of the best of both worlds, where you have a little less flower, which makes a larger, flatter, overall better flower.
It is really cool to kind of be able to see the difference so easily too.
Yeah. So a meristem. Again, something used, especially for cloning, you see it more. You don't really see it too much in the breeding world. But these are specialized cells that are growing. So they kind of are like plant stem cells, or they can kind of turn into anything. You see them on like root tips or the meristem, and then new growth, which is called the apical meristem. It's where things are starting. And you can harvest and collect these cells and use them to clone plants. So a lot of the Phalaenopsis cloning is done this way.
Yeah, as I was learning about meristems, it was really cool to learn just how many of the orchids that we see everywhere, and even the ones that we have, spend a good chunk of their life just as little tiny plants growing in just bottles. They just take the meristem cells and they put it in there with nutrients, and they just keep it there until it's ready. Like,
yeah, well, a lot of the seedlings start off that way too, because orchids have very small seeds, so they have to spend time in specialized nutrient bottles to grow, and it's really interesting.
Super neat.
So an eye, I think we talked about this on an earlier slide, but an eye is essentially a swollen bud or an inactive bud that has potential to grow and become the new lead of the plant, which is essentially just the front of the plant, the growing part of the plant.
And that kind of brings us to the top of the plant, all the way from the bottom, all the way now to the top. We have these words, resupinate and non-resupinate. These are super cool terms, and they derive from the Latin supinus, which means back bent with the face upwards. And I love that someone back in the day who was speaking Latin said, we need to have a word for this very particular thing. I don't know if this is a plant they were looking at or if somebody was doing this. I'd be really concerned for them. They came up with this word for it just to cover all their bases. And it means, in the modern day, the twisting of flowers 180 degrees as they open. So cattleyas are resupinate, and they're one of the better examples. But do you want to kind of take over some of these examples that we're seeing?
Yeah, so it's very interesting because I don't really think about it too much, but as most of these orchids are opening, their buds will twist around so that that lip is on the bottom, that modified petal is on the bottom, and they think it's to act as a kind of pollinator landing strip. We talked about that in one of our earlier talks, where it's a big, like, attractive area and acts as a place where the bugs can actually land. And a lot of the orchids that we grow are resupinate. They have the lip at the bottom. But there are other orchids, like everything, I feel like, in the plant world, it's like we've got rules and then always exceptions to the rules. So there are other orchids like the epidendrum. This is the picture that I have is an epidendrum igabaguense, which has non-resupinate flowers, which means the lip is facing up pretty much, or at the top of the flower. And some of our native orchids too, the grass pink that we talked about is another non-resupinate orchid. So it's just all the diversity within the orchid world.
That's really cool. I wanted to show an example too of what that might look like. Can you see me? I cannot see me.
Yes, I can see you.
That's great. So it kind of look, so like the plant is like opening, and say like up here, this candle is the lip. It's gonna do this, but what that really looks like for the plant is that, so it's kind of like this, and it's gonna kind of like twist around. And so if you look up really close to the plant, you'll be able to see that twist in the flower. And we have some more examples too. It was really hard to find anything where you could see the twist happening, but I think it's really kind of amazing how much we take for granted, kind of, I don't know, how amazing these plants are.
You can kind of see a little bit of that twist on the, yeah, right back there. But yeah, it's so interesting.
So we've covered, basically the whole plant from the top to bottom, and we've learned a lot of words, and I kind of wanted just to put it together, like, can you spell it? Can you use it in a sentence? So we're going to try out a phrase. And this phrase is stop buying orchids. We're not really sure what the definition is. You could also try see out of room, too many orchids. It all kind of sounds like gibberish to me, honestly, but I'm sure someone out there might know what it means.
I don't think anyone in this club does.
Probably not. It's tough. I couldn't even find it on AOS.
Yeah, it's not there.
No. They do, though, have a really great list, which is where most of these definitions came from, of basic orchid vocabulary. And I'm sure you can also find some more advanced words. So if you ever come up with anything, they're a really great resource.
Yeah, a good resource to find definitions and everything, especially for some of these orchid jargon words. Or, if you're talking to someone and someone uses it, you can always be like, what does that mean? I don't understand that word. But yeah, there won't be a test or a quiz after this, so don't worry about that.
We do have about 8 minutes left, though, if anyone has any questions or words that we didn't cover.
Yep, people can put more words in the chat if they have a question, or they can unmute themselves and ask us.
I have a question about back bulbs.
Okay.
If you want to divide your, let's see, a stanopia, and so you have bulbs that are still very green and firm, and yet you have a lot of growth to the side. How would you, where and how would you cut it, and how long would you have to wait to see if there's an eye there, because sometimes you never see an eye. and so I figure, Elise, you're learning that with the AOS, so it's always a conundrum for me. Am I wasting my time? Is there something I should be looking for? So that's my question.
That's a tough question. You definitely have to judge it based on plants. And, I know you generally want to make divisions that are at least 3 back bulbs large. That generally gives the plant enough energy to start again. But I've had some back bulb divisions that, I've put them in a bag, high humidity, and they just don't do anything for years. I actually have another Stanhopea in a bag that was just 2 unrooted back bulbs that I got earlier this year, that has a little bit of sphagnum, so it's high humidity. And I didn't see any eyes on it. And I was like, well, I wasted my money trying to grow this thing, thinking that I could do anything, but I just took it out of the bag today and it's got an eye starting. So it's really with those back bulbs,
it's hit or miss.
It's really
think it's hit or miss.
What it wants to do. Sometimes they'll decide to grow, other times they won't. I've also had a new growth fall off of a back bulb, or break off of a back bulb, and it grew fine. So it all depends on the plant and your conditions, but right.
It depends on what that bulb is, but I've been working a lot with Thunia, or Tunia, however you say it, Thunia, and they throw a long stem, and then they blossom on that. And that thing goes dormant. but if you cut it and put it in sphagnum, some of these little I just call them eyelashes, along that little joint, will sometimes throw another plant. So so they're wonderful. And so it's like a poker game. I love them. So
it's all very interesting. I see we have a question in the chat from Yvonne and Jill that asks if the polychromosomes will stay. And this is part of the genetics of the plant. So if you have a plant that has multiple sets of chromosomes, they'll stay throughout the entire life. The only way that you could get more or less is really by breeding, and then your offspring would have more or less. I know there's some treatments that you can do to seeds to try and induce that polyploidy and extra chromosomes. But it's really, what your plant is what it'll stay.
Great. That is a really great question. There's been great questions. We are basically out of time. But if there's not any other really super quick questions, I think we'll call it a night. And thank you all for coming to our Orchid chat and learning these great vocab words. So we can all
Good
go
job.
around, and at our next the next meeting, we can look at the show table and say, that's a very nice Resupinate flower.
Yeah, we can use all our terms that we've learned here.
It'll be
Yep.
great.
Okay,
Well, thank
All
you all
right.
so much for coming.
excellent.
Thank you.
Yep.
Goodbye.